Can everybody see my?
Yep, got your slides.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Well, I introduced myself. Here's a little bit about Elevate and our mission. As I mentioned, we design and implement programs to reduce cost, protect people and the environment, and ensure the benefits of clean and efficient energy use reach those who need it most. This is a aerial shot of some of the folks on our team at one of our quarterly all staffs. I am the nice looking young lady here in the green, so up there in the front. You know, we're a really mission-driven organization. We're a nonprofit. Although we are based out of Chicago, we do work in about 9 different markets across the country. And we have a style of engagement with communities that's really based in authentic communication and very high quality grassroots relationships. And so as a result, we're able to reach people effectively through our services, whether it is an energy efficiency or electrification program, or we're doing just energy education so that people can understand their bills. About 3 years ago, we underwent some strategic planning, and we thought it was important as part of that process to really define, you know, what our culture emanates at Elevate. And through that, we came up with the culture pillars you see on the screen now. We take urgent action on climate change and racial income inequality. We honor how people live and work. We're curious, moving, growing, adapting, and evolving. We are trusted and continue to aspire for excellence. We are lifting as we climb. I consider many of these to be sort of rooted in our work, but also very aspirational in a sense that it allows us to continue to grow as an organization. These are some of the customers that we serve. So both renters and homeowners, building owners and property managers, nonprofits. And we could probably expand this because we also serve daycares through some of the work we do on lead abatement, and a number of other, you know, facilities via solar. So here's a more comprehensive list of some of the work that we're involved in. I won't read all of this off. I just wanted to give folks a sense of, you know, how many hats we wear at Elevate. So this is a snapshot of all the work we do at Elevate. I'm going to narrow our focus a little bit and talk a little bit about what my team at Elevate does. I oversee a group of grassroots energy educators, and resource coordinators on what's known as the community resources team. And for the past 9 years, we have been engaged in, we initially started talking to people about smart meters, the AMI technology, when it initially rolled out in Illinois. And that just expanded into talking about a number of energy related topics, energy efficiency programs, demand response programs, because there was a huge demand for the information that we had to share. And people were not just interested in smart meters, if they even knew what that was at the time. So our style of engagement prioritizes listening first. We listen as a form of leadership. So as opposed to going into a community and telling them what we have to offer them, we really like to listen to what their priorities are, and how, you know, we can help to support that, if at all. And in many ways, we advocate on behalf of communities, and we educate. I talked a little bit about that, and people often come to us for advice, as we are trusted messengers in the communities that we serve. You'll see here, there's some language, asset builders, asset framers, storytellers. Internally, we underwent an asset assessment for our team. And so these are some of the assets that we came up with as a group that describe the way that we engage communities. So I just thought I'd capture that here. You know, we try to give guidance where, you know, we're asked. You know, in the work talking about the AMI technology and educating communities about what this new meter might mean for them, we started to hear a lot back from communities about some of the things that they were frustrated regarding with regards to their utilities, whether it was cost, whether it was, you know, energy crises where they were disconnected from their services. And so we found that we couldn't just talk about smart meters. We really had to make sure that we could address people's immediate concerns, whatever that was, and we had to prioritize meeting them wherever they were on their energy journey. We do have a policy team, so you know we're advocates in the policy space. We have, you know, an excellent call center that provides top-notch customer service. We have a lot of experience. Elevate has been working in this space for over 20 years. And we've learned a lot about the importance of managing relationships at the community level. And so because a lot of our work is community driven, we're allowed to, you know, come up with creative ideas, you know, which I could talk about, but I won't. I have a lot of slides to get through, so maybe you guys will have me back. We really want to, you know, help communities assess where they are in their energy journey, analyze and provide any technical support, and then help them curate sort of a path forward, whatever that looks like for them. So some of the ways that we do this is we are, you know, my team is typically in community. That means that we might meet with people one-on-one. We might go to organic community meetings that folks are having already. We might partner with a library and set up a workshop. And of course, this was prior to COVID. They're virtual now, but we call them house parties. And the idea is that you know, someone invites us into sort of some of their more intimate relationships, or I don't mean that in an inappropriate sense, but they're neighbors, right? The people that are close to them, their colleagues at work, and they invite them. We used to do them in people's living rooms. It was kind of like a Tupperware party, but instead we would talk about, you know, weatherization of their homes and local energy programs that they could get signed up for. We would give out Nest thermostats to help them, you know, manage their temperatures at home. We would, and we could collect a lot more information in person. We could find out, you know, what they were interested in. We created a form called an exit ticket that allowed us to capture or to demonstrate that you know, people were really retaining the information that we were sharing with them. So it was just a few quick questions at the end of the presentation that we asked people to answer. But we tracked their responses, and we could tell that people who filled out the exit tickets were more likely to, you know, participate or sign up in a program. And so being able to show that correlation was really powerful for us. You know, lunch and learn spaces where companies are already gathering, tabling events. They tend to take up a lot of time, but they, again, are just organic community spaces where people are already getting together. And anytime you can leverage those opportunities, I suggest doing it. Social media. Now, our story with social media started when COVID hit, when the pandemic hit. Like everybody else, we had to pivot. We had to change our approach from being in person to being completely virtual. And we noticed that a lot of people were gathering in social media spaces. And so we took that opportunity to build, you know, a social media page that was specifically dedicated to finding community resources around energy, whether that's emergency funding in your community, you know, an event, a workshop that we might be hosting virtually, energy rate changes, it really varied the kind of information that we could share. But what we learned, and again, we were fortunate, we had a funder that was funding this work. But what we learned is that, in the social media space, it really pays to have sort of a paid media structure, the way the algorithms are set up, having a way to structure strategic paid advertising on social media was extremely beneficial to us. We were able to galvanize like 4,000 followers who we could interact with, in an instant via Facebook. And then eventually we expanded to Instagram and YouTube. We had a lot of success on YouTube too. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. This is just sort of an example of where you might, do some of the events. I talked about this a little bit. One-on-one meetings are really targeted towards people who are influential in their communities, or people who are decision makers, for their home or for their multifamily building. And that allows you to get sort of the most direct communication and time with people. After a one-on-one meeting, people are usually pretty motivated to take, sort of actionable next steps. Community meetings would sort of be like the next best thing. Again, you can get, about 15 minutes to be added to an agenda at an existing meeting, but at least it gets you visible in that community. It gets people aware of who you are and familiar with your work or with your program. Libraries are a great place. They are an organic space where people are already gathering. They already have audiences and a reach that you're able to leverage to get the word out about your workshop. And they're really nice to work with. I love libraries. I talked a little bit about house parties. You can do them in a single family or a multifamily setting. They tend to take a little bit longer, so it allows you to go into more detail about the program and give some deeper education. Lunch and learns are also really good. You may have to split that time or with another presenter, but it still gives you a good chunk of time. And I found that although they tend to be sort of smaller audiences, like maybe 10 to 15 people, at Lunch and Learns, people are very engaged. They have a lot of questions, and they're really eager to participate. And then, of course, every community is different. I know I'm talking to sort of a national audience here, and so you all are the experts at the community about the communities where you live. And so we always invite people to think about what are some new ways, what are some new strategies to reach people that, haven't been tried before. I talked a little bit about tabling. Tabling allows you to reach a lot of people if it's like a big community event or festival, but it's time intensive. It can take 4 hours just if you're set up for the entire event, and you may need more than one person at a time to attend, depending on the traffic. I won't go through this again. I think we talked about a lot of this already. Some of the results that we have is that, we were funded by ISAF, the Illinois Science and Energy Innovation Foundation, to do, I think I talked about the smart meter education. And we were funded at the time. That funding just ended this year, but it was for about 8 or 9 years, since 2014. And we held almost 2,000 events, and we were able to reach over 266,000 people. And a lot of folks were able to hear about information that they hadn't heard before and connect to programs that they would not have otherwise been able to connect to. And so, we had a team of folks working across the state. We had a team of about 10 people who were doing this work. And so I don't want to minimize the effort that it takes. It is an investment, but I want to highlight that investment is critical to really having a successful program where you have buy-in from the community and it doesn't feel like you're an outsider coming to talk to them about something that's not relevant to them or not important to them or not designed for them to participate in. That's a little bit about our presentation work or our tactics, how we do our events. And that's part of the work that we do. But the other part of the work that we do is we try to focus on centering a very conscious communication style. And it's helped us to build deeper, more authentic relationships at the community level, because we're speaking in a language that is familiar to people. Some of the reasons that we think that this is important is because, you know, if you've worked in this space, or you've designed programs, or you've even had to apply for funding for a program, you often hear language that is used to describe entire communities of people, but it's very deficit-based in the way that, you know, we might say a low-income community or a disadvantaged community. And it's not to say that people with low income don't live in that community. It's to say that that's not the only thing that exists in that community. And so when we're using language that only highlights communities' deficits, it can really create a barrier for us being successful in communicating about anything, really. So, you know, we've taken the time to learn from Travian Shorters. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of him. If you haven't, look him up. He is an author and an activist and an educator. And he talks a lot about asset framing and the value of really thinking through what are the assets that we can use to describe communities with. You know, what's going well, you know, almost, you know, based on sort of an appreciative inquiry approach, as opposed to what's not going well, what isn't working, what are the community's deficits. The language alone can be very impactful in how, you know, you're received at the community level. And I found that people really appreciate it. People really appreciate it. So I talked a little bit about some of these. I won't read them verbatim. I'll leave them up for folks that want to see. And I believe I can provide copies of the slide deck to folks too. This is not new information to anyone, you know. Different communities have different languages. They have different cultural backgrounds. They behave differently. I can give an example. I was at a library. This is not in my current role, but in my previous role. I was at a library in a Spanish-speaking community in my neighborhood. And so I had a translator helping me to talk to the audience. And I learned that there is no direct Spanish translation for the word furnace. And I was talking about weatherization and energy efficiency and, you know, rebates that you might get from your utility company. And I had to keep in mind that there's no right. Like, so little things like that might seem minor, but again, they can help you connect to your audience if you're mindful of them up front. You know, you don't have to guess what to call people. Typically, if you ask them, they will tell you. And so I found that it's helpful to, you know, talk about people in the way that they identify themselves or talk about themselves, for example. And you know, that requires a little footwork, right? You gotta sit down and invest in those conversations. So that, right, when your finished product is done, you can demonstrate that you were considerate of that. I can't tell you how far that goes. It's an intangible thing. However, when it comes to rebuilding, trust at the community level, those kinds of intangibles are invaluable. This goes a little bit back to sort of the why of, being conscious in our communication, because it really does activate different parts of our brains depending on the language that we're using. And I found that when you are thinking about a community's assets, finding solutions becomes much easier to whatever the challenge is, right? Like, it actually doesn't matter what the challenge is. When you focus on what is working well, you're more successful at overcoming any barriers or any challenges. And so that's why, again, it's a little bit intangible, right? We're talking about language, but, we're living in a time where language is ever more important. And this is the time to, if you're designing a program, or if you're thinking about, how do I best reach people? This is the time to be mindful of the language you use to describe the people you're trying to reach. Getting to know sort of the cultural differences, whatever that means for, the communities that you're looking to reach. If you don't have those relationships yourself, you might need to connect with somebody who does, right? You might need to prioritize, figuring out the organizations or the individuals or the community leaders who have those relationships that you need to build for your programs to be successful. And how can we talk about people centering, respect? Language can build bridges, it can change our mind. Language can move people to action. I have seen that at work. This is a graphic that my colleague Emma created, but if you take a look, you'll see some of the language that we use very regularly in our work. I know I do, or I have. I've gotten much better about it now. But I did it without even thinking about it prior to, learning a new way. And so, although there may be, I found myself in a situation where the funder, like if I'm applying to a grant, whether it's a foundation or the local state government, right? They're using that language. So, it makes me feel like I have to use it too. And so what I try to do is use that as an opportunity to say, hey, I know you all use this language, but this is the way that we've, found to be more successful reaching the communities that we serve. And so it can actually turn into an opportunity to educate whoever happens to read your, your application, to demonstrate that, this is something that we're thinking about. This is something that we've heard from communities, matters to them. So. I talked a little bit about this earlier. We really prioritize listening as a form of leadership. We're not going into a community to say, hey, look at this program we have for you. It's wonderful. Sign up and tell all your friends and family. We have opportunities, working in the program implementation space to talk to communities before we design a program and say, hey, we were thinking about this. What are you all's thoughts? What are some of the priorities for you? As a result of doing that, I would say, a little over the past decade. Illinois, a few years ago, passed the first 100% clean energy bill in the state. Governor Pritzker signed it. It's called the Clean and Equitable Jobs Act. And Elevate was part of the Illinois Jobs Coalition, which is the statewide group of advocates who really helped to, communicate to our legislators how important having an equitable energy transition is at the community level. People were tired about hearing about how great renewable energy is, but they weren't reaping the benefits of the green jobs. And so, this is still early. So, we're really hopeful about how the programs and how the funding for this will really transform the energy economy in Illinois. But to me, what was more profound and impressive was the grassroots effort of the advocates. They used a model of listen, lead, and share, where they asked communities what they wanted to see. It was a statewide initiative. It wasn't all focused on what Chicago wanted to do. Central and southern parts of the state were very vocal that, they needed resources as well. And so you see all of that input reflected in the bill. Again, that's a whole nother presentation, but an example of how, listening can be very transformative in changing how we engage at the community level. It helps to build trust. It also helps you to, determine whether or not you're the right organization or the right entity to take on the leadership of a certain project at the community level. One of the things that we've had to do as an implementer is say, hey, we've heard from the community and it doesn't sound like we're the right fit, to lead this effort. And that's okay, right? That's what we want. We want communities to feel or to reconnect to their power, I would say, because the word empowered is a little questionable to me, right? Like communities are inherently powerful, but really about reconnecting to that power so that they are choosing their paths forward. And with a new model, with an energy transition, we have a real opportunity to do that. And I'm optimistic, which is good. One of the examples of how we have, had to be conscious in our communication and really work at the community level to build out a program was through our workforce and contractor accelerator program, which was really accelerated by our participation in Illinois Solar for All, which is the program that we administer to ensure that environmental justice communities get access to solar. Communities that have traditionally been left out of important conversations around energy can actually get access to the benefits of the clean energy economy. But there was not just an effort to sign people up to get solar. We also administer a workforce training program to help connect people with solar jobs. So we didn't just do that on our own. The result of that came from deep partnerships, many years of listening, and we developed that program to the best of our ability to reflect what we heard the community would like to see. I talked a little bit about asset framing. Travian Shorters is the pioneer of asset framing. I learned about him at a conference I attended many years ago called ComNet. And, he talks about how we don't have to frame everything around a community's deficits. You actually can, define people based on their aspirations, their strengths, you know, what might be working well at the community level for them. I can't tell you how powerful that is. We took the notion of asset framing and designed what we call conscious communication, and that is, you know, really just being thoughtful and respectful in how we talk to people and how we talk about communities. I want to highlight this bullet point here. You know, when we talk about asset framing or conscious communication, we're not saying that you ignore that communities have challenges. Certainly, every community I've ever visited has challenges. However, it's about not limiting that language to, you know, being the only story that you tell or being the only part of the story that you tell, right? It's like, how can we highlight other things that are happening at the community level? And again, you're not fabricating anything, right? You're telling the truth, you know? Communities do have assets. I don't care where you go or who you talk to, you can find strengths at the community level. They do exist. This is just an example, right, of how we might have talked about contractors in the past and how we work to asset frame the way that we talk about contractors now. A few more words, but still. I also mentioned this before, right? Like, strive to find language that reflects how people talk about themselves. You know, sometimes people say, well, how do we know how people identify themselves? And I say, if you don't know, then you should go back and listen some more and ask them. Because again, in my experience, people will tell you. And these things are not finite, right? They change over time. You'll see how you'll see African-American people or Black people change the way that they describe themselves over time. And so being up to date on what that might look like can be beneficial. This is an example of people first language. You know, sometimes again, we're talking to funders, or we're talking to you know, the federal government, and we're applying for funding. And so, you know, how can we still use the language that they use, I guess, right? We don't want to disqualify ourselves, but how can we continue to center people first? This is an example of how to put people before whatever condition they might be experiencing, depending on where they live, right? So you might say communities experiencing poverty, because that's an experience. That doesn't define the totality of who someone is. That is their experience, versus poor communities. So a slight nuance, but still centering people first. Passing the mic, I hinted on this before. Again, you know, it's not always appropriate for you to take the mic or for you to tell the story on behalf of people. Allow folks to speak on behalf of themselves, to define themselves, to tell their own stories. And that involves, you know, stepping back sometimes, right? And not taking on a leadership role. White and privileged communities hold the most power and control in the energy space. We talk about equity when it comes to energy, but the decisions around energy and, what the impacts of those decisions will be over the next decade. That continues to be a predominantly white space, and increasingly, we're seeing folks pass the mic. But if you are in a position to do that, that alone can be a very powerful act, is to say, hey, you know what, I'm not qualified to say this, but I know someone who is, right? That's a simple thing that anybody can do. I talked a little bit about the seizure story. These are some folks from our solar training program, doing some lobbying. So we had some folks who had completed the ILSFA, Illinois Solar for All training program, going down to Springfield here in Illinois to lobby for the Clean and Equitable Jobs Act, which, is historic in the increase in investments and energy efficiency and clean energy here. We've also hired folks from the solar training program to work at Elevate. And so, again, we believe in hiring the people who are closest to the communities that we serve. And our solar training program is targeted to reach people who haven't been involved in these energy conversations before. And with that, I will show you a lovely picture of me and my colleagues again. And I have not been able to look at the chat. I do see that there are a lot of alerts. So if there are questions, I am happy to take them now.
Thank you for that presentation, and it is a lovely photo, so thank you for sharing. So if folks have questions or they want to add a comment to the conversation, feel free to put it in the chat or to raise your hand and I will call on you and unmute the line. There's a couple of questions that came in the chat, but people are sort of gathering their thoughts and preparing their questions. There's one thing I wanted to make sure I followed up on, based on Elevate's experience with program design and program implementation. You touched on this a little bit about, actually going and listening to the community, hearing about their priorities and letting that inform program design. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about what that looks like in practice. Because for all of the states on the line and all of, state partners that are on the line, they will be thinking about, if they're not already, program design for these rebates funds very soon. And so whatever, if it's tactics or any high level thoughts that you want to share on what that looks like, I think that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Maddie. So we have used a few models for the CEDRA work that we were involved in. That happened over years, that took a long time. And so we had more time to do some more like grassroots, we call them listen, lead, share. And that's where we weren't just going out to talk to people about what, CEDRA might be. It's that we were listening to what people thought CEDRA could be for themselves, right? And so you can create that through a series of listening sessions via key stakeholders who might, already be involved in community work where you live, right? And to ask them to say, hey, like, we're thinking about putting, this program together. What might be important to the audiences that you're already reaching, right? What should we consider that we haven't considered already? And so, yeah, we've done some of those kinds of listening sessions with different kinds of partners. You can do them yourselves if you want, right? You can do them formally or informally, but the key is to get a group of representatives, people who represent the audiences you're trying to reach together, and describe what it is you would like to do and ask them, right, what you may have forgotten, right? What did I leave out? Are there other considerations to make around the way that I'm designing my program, for example?
Thanks for that. I'll turn now to a couple questions that came in the chat. The first one is, how do you balance asset framing language without coming across as patronizing?
Yeah, one of the ways to get around that is to, again, listen for how people talk about themselves. That's one of the examples, right? Like, you know, it may not be my lived experience to talk about how another community should identify themselves, right? So I don't do that. I would just ask, this is an example. And again, this is all practice. We're not even perfect at it all the time. We were doing some interviews around a project that we wanted to capture stories around energy burden and people's lived experience with how they managed that. And I participated and I facilitated one of the interviews. And the question asked, one of the questions asked, how do you manage being energy burdened? And she said, I'm not energy burdened. I don't know what you mean by that, right? Like, she did not, that was not language that she used to describe herself. Similarly, I've never been introduced to anyone who, introduced themselves as low income. Hi, my name is Mary and I am low income, such and such. That never happens, right? So how do people talk about themselves? If you do not know, you should ask them. And, how do we center people before their condition, right? So even if we're using some language that might not be considered asset framing, how do we put people first?
And another question for you on language is, can you talk more about how to frame challenges? Are you talking about adding more context to the challenge?
Actually, we've talked about challenges for a really long time. Oftentimes, we're very aware of the challenges that communities face. What we haven't spent as much time doing is, aside from the challenges, what are some of the assets that exist in the communities? We haven't spent a lot of time asking ourselves, asking each other, what is working well? Because I have yet to go to a community, and I've done a little traveling even, I've yet to go to a community that is all bad, where there's nothing good there. So how do we find out what that community's assets are, and how can we shift, the way we talk about communities to inform overcoming some of those communities' challenges? I think that's the real opportunity that asset framing allows us to do, is that we're not just thinking about the community's challenges. It opens us up to consider, how can the community's assets, help to find creative solutions to whatever challenges the community might face.
I'm curious, sorry to put you on the spot. I'm curious if you have any other examples. You mentioned how you sort of reframe your contractor training program. I'm curious if you have any other suggestions or examples, I should say, about how Elevate sort of describes their programs.
Yeah, and again, we're not perfect at this. So if you go to our website right now, you might even find language that isn't asset framed in the best way. And so what we've done is we've tried to get better at it over time. I'll give you an example of one of the ways we've done this on my team. During COVID, we were trying to reach people using social media. And so we had to use language that would talk to the audiences that we wanted to reach, right? To help them find out about energy assistance or rental assistance or whatever the benefit was. And so we were working with a consultant who does all the social media strategy stuff, right? And so we had to tell him what to say. We had to tell him how to write these posts. And so he asked us, well, who are you trying to reach, right? Like, who's your demographic? And as we're describing it, right, he went to say, okay, well, you're trying to reach people who qualify by their income. So we'll put income qualification language in the post. And I'm like, well, we are trying to reach people who qualify based on their income, but is there any other language, right, that we could use to talk about people who, might qualify based on their income and also have other assets or also have other things that we can highlight. A lot of communities where people have struggled with their income, they've often been on the front line of environmental injustice, right? With the energy burden. These are frontline communities. These are people who have had to live through, some of the toughest circumstances, and still live to tell the tale, right? So, resilient, communities, right? These are folks, yeah, they've had challenges, but they're still alive.
Another question for you in the chat. Will you have best practices or maybe a toolkit that states can use to suggest diversity, equity, and inclusion into their upcoming state rebate programs? And then sort of a follow-up to that is, will Elevate be available to advise states on how to reach out to these communities that we're describing today?
I would say yes. Elevate would be happy to help with that for folks who are interested. Maybe I can go here. You guys have seen my colleagues long enough. This is my contact information. So you can reach out to me by email, you can call me. I am responsive, and we can talk about, whether Elevate's a good fit or not, to help with what you have in mind. As far as resources, we did a similar presentation for this internally that had a number of references and resources. And what I can do is I can pass that on to you, Maddie, because it's a comprehensive list. So I didn't include it here, but I'm glad that somebody asked about it, because yes, we do have resources for more information on that.
And I will happily take that list and share it with folks. And for people who might not have been part of previous calls that we've had in this series, NASEO, we're in the hopefully final stages of putting together our own request for information so that, Elevate, whoever wants to submit ideas for program implementation, we can sort of like collect those and have them all in one spot for states to review later when it comes time to put pen to paper and start designing their program. So I'm happy to sort of collect all of these ideas and post them so that states have easy access to them.
Yeah, awesome. Keep me posted.
Yes, absolutely. You're getting props in the chat. Otherwise, do folks have any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand if you don't want to add anything in the chat.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, do you want to leave us with any final thoughts before we wrap things up for today?
You know what, just to say thank you for inviting me, Maddie. I think that some really good questions came out today, and I'm happy to come back and talk to you guys anytime.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we've got a long road ahead of us designing those programs, so I'm sure we'll be coming for you. One of those careful what you wish for situations.
Not a problem at all. We welcome it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for taking the time to present, and thank you to the audience for tuning in today and asking all of your questions. We will, like I said at the top, we will regroup in a couple of weeks with a new series. But in the meantime, everyone have a great few days, and thank you again for presenting. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Maddie, and thank you, everybody. It's good to talk to you guys.